Welcome everybody to our webinar, implementing a self-healing CMDB with high quality data. Some housekeeping rules: please mute your lines. You can submit any questions via the Q&A feature, and we'll email you a recording after the session. And you can sit back and you can enjoy the session. A small introduction where we talk about the rare phenomenon that is a high quality CMDB, but it enables a lot of use cases. So we try to explain why a high quality CMDB is so hard to achieve. Then we'll talk about our self-healing CMDB solution that focuses on governance, ownership, data models, and automation. And we explain how our approach aims to obtain a self-healing CMDB with high quality data. We close the session focusing a little bit on implementing CSDM. So we take a short look at how we approach that, implementing it in practice in large enterprises. And in the end, there's a few minutes of time to ask any questions, or we'll deal with some questions from the chat. So introduction, I'm here together with Dylan Veerman. So Dylan Veerman is the strategic capability lead of data. That basically encompasses all data elements at Platformation. So that includes the CMDB, CSDM, but also reporting and analytics and ITOM and discovery. So basically anything that has to do with data. And I'm Rogier Vruchten, and I'm the capability lead for CMDB and CSDM specifically. Now, I want to raise a poll, if that's able, Kirtan, on how would you rate the current quality of your CMDB on a scale of 1 to 5?
Launching the poll. Almost there. And we're closing the poll.
Okay, I see a lot that are in the middle of the pack and no one that went for the high super quality excellent CMDB. I think that is very recognizable. So next session is about, high quality CMDBs are rare, but they are worth pursuing. And we always like to quote something that's relevant for the CMDB is, if you don't know what you have, how can you manage it? So if you don't know what's in your CMDB, if you don't know the quality of it, if you don't know who owns it and how it's being populated, then how can you possibly manage it and know the completeness of it? Now, high quality CMDBs are rare, and a vast majority of business have a broken CMDB. About 77% of enterprises have a missing or deficient CMDB. It's also very recognizable that 80% of the CMDB projects add no value to the business. Very regularly we enter a CMDB project at an organization, and for most infrastructure teams or for most CMDB teams there, it's not the first CMDB project. It's the 5th, the 6th, or the 7th CMDB project in the past 10 years that has tried to get a high quality CMDB in place. Now, 1 out of 3 CMDB challenges stem from data completeness or quality concerns. So it's not just about the technology specifically or the data, it's all about the completeness and the quality concerns, what actual data is in there. And 85% of companies fail at creating a CMDB that fulfills their business use cases. Now, having a poor quality CMDB can cause employees to spend significant amount of data on non-value added tasks, which is something as an enterprise you don't want your employees to do. So on an average, 30% of the total employees' time within an enterprise is spent on non-value added tasks because of poor data quality and availability. Maybe you recognize this within your enterprise, in your CMDB, but if certain departments are managing their own Excel sheets outside of the CMDB, where they have a list of their servers or a list of their databases or a list of their applications, or you have trouble in giving in completing data requests for your CMDB, then that kind of indicates that there's a poor data quality or availability of data, and that results in a lot of people trying to maintain their own lists or trying to get the data from other places, and that is basically time spent by the employees on non-value added tasks, which is basically money lost by the enterprise in the end. Now, it's very worth it to pursue a high quality CMDB, especially in ServiceNow, because it enables a variety of use cases across the platform. Now, there are a number of listed here, but some that I want to highlight is risk. So if we have a high quality CMDB with all our servers, all our databases linked to the correct applications with a high quality, we can determine risk, we can do security impact, we can do disaster recovery. If all our technology is linked together from application to infrastructure to the services it delivers, we can do proper application portfolio management. So it enables a lot of modules in ServiceNow, but also a lot of just risk use cases, security use cases across the enterprise. And in the end, the most important one, of course, if you have a good CMDB, that improves your IT service management, it improves your change management. You know how certain changes impact the different applications and services that you provide in the organization. So I think not a lot of customers argue that the high quality CMDB is really worth it. So I think everyone wants a high quality CMDB, but why is it so hard to implement a CMDB with high data quality? Some of the common pitfalls that we have seen in projects is the first one is we try to centrally solve the problem. So the traditional enterprise organization, when the CMDB is kind of this thing that they implement either during an ITSM project, or it was already there, or it's part of their ServiceNow implementation. And then they assign some kind of central CMDB team with one single manager that's also doing all the discovery and all the ITOM. That's basically responsible and accountable for the data quality in the CMDB. This is an impossible task in large enterprises, as they don't have the mandate nor the resources to get that quality of data from the data sources and the data providers in the organization. And one other pitfall we see is that there's too much focus on the data. So we just purely focus on the data that's there in the CMDB, and we neglect looking at the bigger picture of data providers, data owners, accountability, responsibilities, and processes. The last one is approaching it as a technical problem. So, okay, we want a high quality CMDB. Let's fix this. Let's roll out discovery. Let's roll out the agent client collector. Let's connect with Azure. We purely focus on technology and getting more resources into the CMDB. And that means basically that you neglect necessary processes that are required to enable a high quality CMDB. So a bit like asset management, a large part of having a high quality CMDB is also having the right processes in place that connects everything together, from data providers to data owners to the eventual configuration items that reside in your CMDB. Now, our solution to this approach is the self-healing CMDB, and now I would like to hand it over to my colleague Dylan Veerman.
Yes, thank you, Rogier. So let's move into the self-healing CMDB concept. Basically, we created this big egg where we should start from the outside and then move to the inside. Basically, the idea is that we first need to get the foundation in place, which talks about having a clear governance, knowing what kind of roles and responsibilities are there, looking at policies and processes. Ownership, very important to have that ownership in place, because if we cannot assign tasks or assign responsibilities to people, then nothing will actually happen within the CMDB. In that area, we like to assign domain and class owners, as well as we need to identify data stewards. But also important, as Rogier already mentioned, okay, who are actually our consumers of the data, in order to align with them what their needs are. Then third step is the target model and definitions. So that's basically what do we want to store within the CMDB, and what do we actually mean with certain data objects. So CSDM is very handy there. Okay, what is actually a business application? Do we have the same definition of a business application? And what if we want to store a business application in the CMDB? What kind of attributes do we then want to store within there? What is the recommended and what is the required fields? Lifecycle management, that's really about how are we going to create, update, and retire data objects within the CMDB. And if you have these four things in place, then you actually have your foundation in place. And then we're going to make it self-healing or self-sustainable by leveraging the platform capabilities of ServiceNow. 2A is the workflows. So let's build the processes that we have defined within the ServiceNow platform, supported by catalog items if necessary, but at least allowing work to be flown throughout the platform with the right task being assigned to the right people. Automation, very important. So automate where possible, because we want to lower the manual effort of the people that need to maintain the data. We want to make their lives easier in order to make it actually manageable to update the CMDB. You can think of creating audit tasks, verification tasks, but also automating data uploads, as well as configuring the dynamic IRE engine. Dashboards and reports, very important to get the insights in how your data quality is doing, but also how we are progressing with the tasks that have been defined. And the multi-source CMDB, which is very important. We would like to connect multiple source systems towards the ServiceNow CMDB to keep the existing way of working intact, as well as to be able to automate and to enhance the data from multiple sources. So it could be, of course, that source A has a certain set of information and source B has the missing parts that are not available in that system. So let's combine these two things in order to get a more complete data in the CMDB. And that basically, that total picture allows you to actually keep the data of the CMDB up to date, and also to continuously improve it over time. Because we are facilitating in such a way the people that are responsible for maintaining the data, that they actually are able to do it in not such much time. The CSDM, the Common Service Data Model, is a very essential framework that we need to leverage in order to get this done. So CSDM is the model that explains to us where we should store the data, how we should relate the data to each other, but it also gives us a lot of descriptions and definitions of certain data objects. Very important to adopt this model and to adhere to it, as well as to communicate it within the organization, because it's one of the corner base fundaments of your getting your CMDB up to date. So getting the foundation in place, as already shortly mentioned, governance, ownership, target models, and lifecycle management. We will get into the details per building block. So if you could continue. So basically, the governance that we set up in an organization is a CMDB institute, how we would like to call it, or you can say it's a SACM capability or a CMDB capability. But the role of the institute is actually being a facilitator in driving the CMDB data quality. And the CMDB institute is in the middle, but we have a lot of different stakeholders, different groups, which we need to align with. And so, for example, we have architecture, compliance, and security, who we need to align with on policies, security standards, and where we actually get a lot of use cases from. We have the domain and class owners who are actually owning the data, which we are supporting in a way that they are actually able to maintain their data. So, for example, they do not have the insights in a certain data object, so we can build a report for them in order to facilitate them to do their work in a better way. The data consumers we need to align with. They can come with special requests if data is, for example, incorrect, or if they have a certain demand, they can put up a request to the CMDB Institute to actually get this done. Data suppliers, it could be that we have vendors that are managing a part of our CMDB. Let's assess the data, let's create a way of working, and let's integrate where possible. And in many cases, the CMDB Institute is, of course, dependent on the CMDB, on the ServiceNow team, or there are multiple ServiceNow teams that we need to align with and cooperate with in order to get that CMDB to the next level. And in this process, we have certain meetings that we like to set up. So the data quality connects are on bi-weekly between the CMDB Institute and the domain and the class owners. We have the data quality meeting on which we, on a higher level, report on how the progress is going, what the data quality is doing, and what the impediments are. And stakeholders connect are to actually align and show what we are doing with the CMDB towards the consumers. And the CMDB Institute is supporting a couple of processes to get this done. Ownership. So it's very important to first make a logical split of your CMDB, and this is dependent a little bit on how you're organized. But in many cases, we see the split being made on service level or on IT domain level. And basically what we do is we assign a domain owner who is ultimately accountable for the definition of the target model and the completeness, correctness, and quality of the CMDB that they are responsible for. Then we have class owners who are more operational and more involved in the actual day-to-day business, they actually know more of the details. So what kind of attributes do we really need? What kind of use cases do we need to enable with this data? And then we have the data stewards that are actually day-to-day responsible for maintaining the data. And an example of how you could split up your domains is based on technical services. It's based on technical service, and usually what we do is we go into the organization, we have a look at, okay, well, what kind of technical services are we delivering, who is responsible for that technical service. So for example, we have a portfolio that's called infrastructure, we have a sub-portfolio called data, we have a technical service that's database, and then for these databases service, we define the different offerings. And based on these offerings, we again assign the ownership for maintaining the data. So usually you see that there is a team responsible for the Oracle databases. They know actually, or they should know what kind of CIs they are managing within their service. And based on that, we set up the model in order to maintain the data as well. And we do the technical services definition based on industry standards, like the TBM taxonomy. We use that as a baseline, and we go into the organization to work from there. Basically, most of the IT organizations are similar in what they offer. It's just about, okay, what do you offer then and how do you manage it, or how do you offer it to your end user? That differs. Target model and definitions. So basically, this is a very important step. This is where you actually agree on the definitions, as well as you look into what do we want to store of this data object in the CMDB. Within this data modeling exercise, we also touch upon things like naming conventions, but we also already talk about what kind of audits and verification rules should we put in place, as well as things as data privacy and retention. We need to know this information. Let's do this during these data model sessions, and let's store it in a central place so that everybody knows what we are trying to do with it. Lifecycle management processes. So there are two types of processes actually that we should maintain. So first is the lifecycle processes to create, update, and retire CIs within the CMDB. So this could be related to services and offerings, dynamic CI groups. It could also be applications and application services. And if we talk more about the CIs, then of course the retirement of servers or databases is very important. And we have standard flows for this that we align with the customer, see if we can plot it on their organization, and then we actually implement it in a quick way. And looking at the supporting or facilitating processes that the CMDB Institute is delivering is, for example, new data demand, data quality incidents, change ownership, or a new data integration request, which are also essential in trying to help the organization to get a better and higher quality CMDB. Hand it over to Rogier again.
Yeah, part 2, make the CMDB self-healing. So that's the part where we focus on configuring the workflows to support the ongoing maintenance of the CMDB. So this is again the focus on not having that central CMDB team do everything, but focus on getting the automated task, having the data owners correct the data themselves, and we automate as much as possible where we can. And then we build a dashboarding and reporting layer on top that allows the basically executive management, but also domain owners and class owners to see how well the data stewards are doing their tasks, but also what is the quality of their classes in the CMDB. And what we also try to do here is improve the amount of data sources and integrate more data sources in the CMDB to improve the data quality. So the workflows, that's basically where we configure the workflows to support the ongoing maintenance of the CMDB. So basically we have these data stewards, these data owners, and these data consumers, and we facilitate them in accessing and maintaining the data. And we use or we leverage the ServiceNow platform and workflow capabilities for that. Some basic flows that we use for that is basically the support to create, update, and retire data, assessment workflows to improve the data quality. So think a very common one is business applications or application services. You want to regularly assess the quality of this, want to check if the ownership of that is still correct. want to check if it's still linked to the right CI. So you need to, on a periodic basis, request the owners of this data to verify that's correct. Now, depending on your size of the organization, we either choose to do this via the service portal or do it via the backend. So if you're a smaller organization, you can usually choose for the backend. But if you're a larger organization, then giving people access to the backend of ServiceNow with all these access controls usually becomes a mess and results in a messy CMDB. So for large enterprises, we have predefined catalog items, which you can see here. You can create, update, or retire a technical service, or you can update a business application. Basically anything that has to do with the lifecycle management of these items. Now the automation part, so as Dylan explained in the previous part, a big element of this is defining the data models for things you put in the CMDB. So, one big domain that we usually start with at customers is compute, the servers. But what customers usually neglect to do is define the data models for servers. So what does it actually mean to have a good registration of a Windows server? What are the minimum attributes that are required, and what use cases are they providing to the organization? So what you saw in the previous step is that we do that with the customer. We talk to the infrastructure teams, we talk to stakeholders, and we define these base data models. And then these data models translate in audits. Now, Dylan talked previously a little bit about audits, but it's an often overlooked at feature from ServiceNow, which is out of the box. And in these audits, we can basically define according to the data model what should be a correct registration of a Windows server. If it's not correct, create a task to the right group that can fix this issue. And that's where the automation comes in place. So you're still dependent on people, of course, but not on the central CMDB organization to manage the quality across the entire enterprise. But you put the responsibility and the action at the people that own the data and can actually fix it. So in order to lower the workload and potential errors, we basically automate the data injection and enhancement where possible and free up time for that. So what we always do is we configure, of course, the discovery and service mapping, or we improve where possible. Think about, what should be the processes for adding new subnets? How should your connectivity department work with your other departments to ensure that when a new subnet is deployed, it is also incorporated in discovery? We have that automated creation of tasks based on data quality controls that I just talked about. And we, of course, leverage the dynamic IRE engine from ServiceNow. And then we also enable some smart workflows to create application services, for example. So one common question is, how do I get all my business applications in ServiceNow? Okay, how do I get the owners to create the application services for that? So we have some standard catalog items that allow people to register business applications, but also to automatically then create the application services that should exist based on the business application data. Now, the next layer we built on top is basically the dashboarding and report layer. So building all these audits and building all these data models in the end serves no purpose if we can't track and manage the health and the quality of the CMDB. So the next layer that we built on top is this dashboarding layer. With the right dashboards, we can identify and steer on so-called improvement initiatives. So after defining the right metrics, it's a key task to get a good understanding of what the numbers are telling you: completeness, compliance, correctness, overall health. We need to understand and we need to work with them to improve the different classes. So one thing that we always configure is the coverage, how much of our total landscape is in the CMDB, and the 3 C's: completeness, correctness, and compliance. Now, the continuous improvement and progress, we do improvement initiatives where we often leverage the SIM module of ServiceNow, the continuous improvement module, where we split the domains up into the different improvements. And then based on the domain, we define improvement initiatives. And then the governance that Dylan talked about comes back, where we have bi-weekly quality meetings with a compute domain. We define improvement initiatives, and over time, we improve the domain within that class, so to say. And then the dashboard that you see below, Of course, Dylan also introduced that data steward role that is below the class owner role. So if we have, for example, compute and we have Windows servers, that means there's a support group for Windows servers, and within that organization there should also be the role of data steward, and these data stewards get the tasks to fix data quality issues. And one of the dashboards that we create, because we of course have to operationalize these data stewards, is that they can see all the outstanding tasks for their domain. They can see what attributes are failing the data quality checks, and then they can work on these tasks on a weekly and daily basis. And the multi-source CMDB, so what we see more and more is that ServiceNow is providing the capabilities to leverage multiple data sources in the CMDB. And by having multiple data sources for the same configuration item, you improve the quality of your CMDB. But also something that we do with the data model definitions is we often define sources of truth with the customer. So let's say we talk about Oracle databases and our data owner says Oracle Enterprise Manager is my source of truth for Oracle databases. Okay, we can integrate with Oracle Enterprise Manager and leverage that data into the CMDB, because sometimes it's working better than the discovery patterns from ServiceNow. Or if we talk about storage, we have NetApp from Cloud Insights. So that's a source of truth. So we want to leverage the data that's in the source of truth with ServiceNow. And we see that ServiceNow itself is coming with these so-called service graph connectors, which I'm sure most of you have heard of, which are basically pre-built APIs that connect with these common tools to get the data directly from the source. So not having to rely on mid servers and discovery, but being able to directly get the source at the data. And then of course we can use the IRE engine to say, hey, when we get some data from discovery and when we get some data from Oracle Enterprise Manager, we can actually compare the data and we can define also what data source has the highest source of truth, and we'll therefore update the CMDB. So it provides multiple points of information where you can actually analyze the different data sources through reporting and see what the different data sources are actually saying about your CMDB. And yeah, the multi-source CMDB is then actually the driver for the self-healing in the CMDB in the end, because in the end you want to do as much automation as possible. And here you see those 4 layers in blue, basically, where we have the common service data model, where we define all our services in our IT functions and how they connect to the configuration items in the CMDB. We built the audit rules on top, we built the workflows on top, and then we have a dashboarding layer that allows the insights. And then we see the data stewards on the right. They work with those audit rules, they complete the tasks that they get assigned to them. And then the class owners and the domain owners, they fix on the data quality tasks. The class owner overlooks the data stewards and is responsible for them completing their work. And the domain owner is basically responsible for a larger amount of classes and reports to upper management on the quality of the CMDB. So in the end, everything comes on the left together with some ServiceNow item capabilities, but we also have third-party sources. Then we also have open APIs, file upload, and we also leverage the discovery admin, which is a tool that can analyze discovery schedules and can check if something goes wrong, like a wrong credential for a server or anything like that. Now, some critical success factors that we've learned from implementing these projects, basically, ownership is key. So if you don't assign ownership or you're in your CMDB, then no one will feel responsible. It's also important to talk the same language. So different departments have a different understanding of the same attributes and or definition. Think about an attribute like internet facing. That can mean something totally different to connectivity than it does to your server team. So establishing these data models, where we also establish what these attributes mean and how they should be populated and what the different naming conventions for those things are, those data models are accessible for everyone. And having that CMDB team manage that data models allows you to talk the same language across your organization, which becomes very important if we talk from a reporting perspective. Now, change management, so OCM, so it's a lot of OCM, OCM, OCM if we talk about CMDB projects, and that's because of the large amount of stakeholders that are involved, and to get them all aligned means you need a project manager or an OCM team that can help you talk to the different stakeholders, get them aligned, and get them all on the same page. Data-driven, so quick results. So especially when you talk about CSDM, talk about changing to services, or talk about, this is the 6th CMDB project to try and get the high quality CMDB. You need to get results fast, and you need to show what the current state of the CMDB is to showcase improvement. So get results fast and start with dashboarding. Even if the current state of the CMDB is bad, it still helps to make these pain points visible and to help prioritize. Even if we turn on an audit and it creates 4,000 tasks, it will still show, hey, that's where the pain point lies. That's where we should work on. What should be our highest priority? Okay, that's what will improve in our improvement initiatives. Also, this helps with overall trust levels to see from, hey, this was our starting point. Okay, in 3 months, where are we at now? And that will continuously drive the improvement quality meetings that you will have with the class owners and the domain owners and the executives. Now, executive support is also one of the most important ones. In order to have decision power and be able to set the right priorities and resources, executive support is essential. Usually from the CMDB team itself, you don't have enough power or decision power, so to say, to be able to steer and drive these domain owners or these class owners, because they are usually at a level where you need executive support to be able to drive them to improve quality in the CMDB. If we talk to any infrastructure teams, if you ever try to deploy discovery in a global organization, it's often some kind of demands that you need to put in, and then the infrastructure team might say, we are busy, we cannot add credentials to servers right now, this might happen next quarter. So the same thing will happen when you try to drive improvement initiatives. You need to have the executive power, that time gets freed up for this. Now, facility and steer, establish an institute, like we said, don't let it just rely on the CMDB team. You need an institute that can facilitate and steer. It's not a one-time effort. Keeping quality of the CMDB is a continuous effort that, it's not just a one-time thing, we are done. It should be part of your so-called business as usual organization to manage and maintain the quality of the CMDB. And lastly, automate in order to lower the workload and potential errors. Automate data injection and enhancement where possible. Try to keep the manual upload of Excel data or the manual registration of CIs. Think often like virtual appliances or other types of appliances. Try to keep away from that as much as possible. Okay, and that closes our self-healing CMDB part. I want to close this session, or not close, we'll have some Q&A afterwards. We're talking about the common service data model a little bit. What is our experience and our approach in implementing this in large enterprises? And what are just some of our experience that I've personally also seen in organizations? Now, maybe the difference between CMDB and CSDM. If we talk about the CMDB, that's really that infrastructure data layer usually. So that's the one in orange on the bottom right. So that's where we have, all our servers, all our printers, all our databases, all our application environments. That's really kind of the core CMDB data. But in the end, all those infrastructure components that are managed by infrastructure teams provide some kind of service, some kind of application, some kind of business service to the organization. And that is basically the common service data model. It's that logical layer in the middle that is built on top of this infrastructure data that at one hand looks on the technical service side, how are our IT organizations supporting this infrastructure, and more on the business service side, what actual services is this providing either internally to our internal business units or externally to our customers if you're using something like CSM. And the business applications is, of course, a very important layer that brings that all together. And a common service data model 4.0. If you know the 3.0 model, you'll recognize the red component. My advice is to not really look into this unless you're using the DevOps module, which automates the creation of some of those components. I think most of us will probably recognize the CSDM model, but I quickly want to go to what is in each domain. So the design domain on the top right, that's where your enterprise architects and your application owner resides. It's basically where we want to have a complete list of our business applications and the capabilities that they are supporting. So that's important for architecture demands to see, hey, what applications do we have in the enterprise and what capabilities are they supporting? Then I want to move down to the orange domain. We have business applications, but they are deployed in the organization. So they have some kind of environment like production, dev, and tests, and they are deployed on some infrastructure in the configuration items. And then if we move to the left, we have IT functions in the organizations that are providing technical services like compute, databases, but also level 2 application support that's supporting these application environments, but also the infrastructure components below it. And when we move to the cell consume on the right, that also in the end provides some service to the organization. You know, it's not where we focus on what IT calls it, but how does the business consume and call it. So if we have something like sub production, for example, that can provide, for example, a general ledger offering that's part of a financial management business service. So there we're really focusing on, you know, what kind of business service is provided with that application and how does the organization consume it. And what are the basic steps to getting CSDM in place? Step one, before you start really implementing a CSDM, is my recommendation is to think about setting up an organization around CSDM. So I have customers that have specific service portfolio management teams, but I also have customers that don't have any kind of team around that. And then it often resides in kind of the core CMDB team to build up this team. So if you have a service portfolio management team or something like that, I would connect with them and see how you can work together. But the core is to at least have this kind of CSDM team in your organization. And what they will do is they will define the framework, the policies, and the patterns of all the CSDM objects. So think about how will technical services be created? How will they be registered? What naming conventions will we follow? Will we use them? Will we register them via the backend? Who will be allowed to do that? Or are we going to manage this via the portal? How are we going to register certain SaaS applications compared to certain other applications? How are we going to support people in service design if that is necessary? So the CSDM team is kind of this team that defines all those frameworks, patterns, and policies. And then they support the service owners and teams on the left that are accountable for providing and maintaining the service definition information. So you often have these business relationship teams, which are the business service owners. Then you have an application teams that are managing applications. And then you have infrastructure teams that manage the infrastructure. And that basically then translates in them having to define their business services, the enterprise applications, and the infrastructure technical services. Whatever engagement layer you choose then, either backend or via the portal, and then they can use the roles and responsibilities that you have set forward, which I will talk a little bit about later, to go to the process of identifying the service, defining them. It's up to the CSDM team often to validate and review, and then publish and communicate those services to the organization. Now, as Dylan mentioned before, if you're not a service-oriented organization, it's often very hard to start translating in what are my technical services, what are my business services. So what we prefer to do is have this standard taxonomy and to use that to accelerate the service definition. So we use the TBM taxonomy, which you can see a part of here. So you see some typical end user services on the top, like workplace services, client computing, community and communication and collaboration, or some business services, or some shared and corporate services like our finance services or our facility services. And then on the bottom are more technical services. So think of operations like IT service management, but also security and compliance services, platform services, and as we mentioned before, our core infrastructure services. So the TBM model actually has clear definitions of these portfolios and of each service, what is included in this service and how should it be defined. And they actually also go a level deeper, that for each service, they also give some example service offerings that you could have. So this allows us to quickly talk to infrastructure teams or end user service teams, basically any department that's part of the TBM model, and kind of showcase like, hey, these are some example offerings. Do you have some of these services? You know, some organizations might not have mainframes anymore, but they do have virtual compute. So this allows us to quickly accelerate the service definition in the organization. The next step is kind of, there's many different ways often in which you can define applications and services, so to say. So CSDM provides guidance, but it's up to the CSDM team to kind of provide this standard of how do we register a platform like ServiceNow or SAP. How do we register an end user service like desktop, or how do we register SaaS software? So it's up to the CSDM team to kind of define these standard architecture models that can be used as references and guidelines, but also define the data models for the CSDM objects. So just like Dylan talked about in the self-healing CSDM, when we have a Windows server, we define what we register on it. The same should be done for the CSDM object. When we have a business service, what are the mandatory fields that should be registered? How will we use them? How does it relate to the other objects in CSDM? When we have a business application, what are the minimum requirements that we register? These are the things and the data models that have to first be defined before you can really engage the organization in gathering the data that is required. Now, step 4, if you have these data model examples, if you have these lexicons, then it's up to the CSDM team to have these data model workbooks. And there are both examples from ServiceNow as from Platformation available on how you can create these data model workbooks. And these data model workbooks can then be used to engage with service owners to populate the data on a large scale. So what we do in most enterprises is that we have some kind of organization, and that's spread up into multiple sub-organizations. And in the end, all these data model workbooks can be populated with the right information and explanation, because it's very hard to do the service design if you don't have some kind of central team that can do this for the whole organization. So you need to kind of leverage in that case. So these data model workbooks assist with that, basically. So you can directly upload that in ServiceNow. They only need to be populated by either service owners or application owners, and then you're ready to upload your data and start using it. Of course, configuring the ITSM processes to work with CSDM data is very important. So out of the box, you know, there's some capabilities in ServiceNow. Think about automated assignment group based on service offering, but you can definitely enhance these ITSM processes to work better with CSDM data. Think about the relationship between business service offerings and technical service offerings, making sure that you can select the right level 2 and level 3 team. All that data is available in the CSDM model if you make your service design, but it requires some configuration in the ITSM processes to make that work. And then it's all about dividing and conquer. So one example that we did at a customer is, you know, we organized from the CSDM team this champion session, and the whole organization is basically split up into different departments, which are then called portfolios. And then it's all about leveraging. So we train a number of people in CSDM, and they are basically portfolio managers. They will have sessions within their portfolio with the service owners. And then we use those data models that we've defined, the different architecture and service models, to basically hand out the worksheets and allow the service owners or application owners to do so-called their service model homework. And then it's up to the CSDM team to play more of a validation role. And sometimes in complex applications, you still have to assist in the service design. Think about SAP. There's often a thing where you always need to assist in modeling the entire service, because it's often a very complex case in that sense. Now, frequently asked questions. So how do you get started, and is it possible to do a phased implementation? So with self-healing CMDB, we always start with a phased approach implementation. So I would recommend we usually start, for example, with compute, because servers is often a very large part of the CMDB. And because most of our applications run on servers, it's also a very valuable thing to look at improving the quality of that first. After that, we often look at network or databases. Usually the first part starts about setting up that CMDB Institute organization, and then you onboard domain after domain after domain after you have all the processes in place, that also allows you to expand your scope to the different things. You know, in the end, the class owner and domain owner should make it part of their business as usual to work with these data stewards, where the CMDB Institute can take more of a sitting back role and not having to be involved that much into the data quality, so to say. Now, how much effort would it take from the organization to onboard a certain domain? So from experience in these projects, in the beginning, it depends a little bit on the scope of the project, but it can take like 2 to 3 FTE and an experienced project manager that knows the organization. And it also depends on if you're purely looking at improving the data quality, but also improving the processes with the different teams. So if you're looking at also building all the catalog items and putting them into place and integrating with external data sources, or increasing the scope of the different domains, then it could take a bigger team, like 4 to 5 FTE in that sense. And which domains would you recommend to start with? I will always, like I said earlier, I would recommend to start with the server domain, because that's a very important one. Then I would either move to databases or networks, but I would recommend to always do an assessment of the CMDB, and you can either do that yourself or you can ask us to do it, to kind of pinpoint what is the quality of my CMDB right now. And based on that, we can always agree on an approach there. So if you do an assessment and you see, okay, service is great quality, but our database is lacking, then it makes more sense to start with databases and onboarding them into the data quality initiative. So I would always just do a quick assessment of your CMDB, either yourself or by us, to see what is the recommended point to start with. I think we have 8 minutes left, so I'm not sure if there are some questions from the Q&A, but then Dylan and me can take the time to answer them now.
All right, so 2 things, 3 popping up.
Peter, I think we should have an example.
Yeah, slide 21.
Slide 21. So this is an example, Peter. So this is where on the left side we base everything on TBM. So we have a portfolio like compute, and within there we have these predefined technical service like physical compute. Those are like our bare metal, and then we have virtual compute, which are virtualized servers either by ESX or by VMware or anything like that. And then those virtual compute and containers as an owner is also usually the class owner. And on the portfolios, we usually put the domain owners. And then on the offerings, like a virtual Windows instance or a virtual Linux instance, that connects to the CMDB. Now, your question about applications is a very good question, and it kind of relates to the processes that Dylan talked about. So when you have processes in an organization, they need to be aligned with the CMDB team. So think about a simple process like deploying a new server or requesting a new server from the infrastructure teams. I see a lot of customers where this is an Excel sheet that is sent by the infrastructure team to the customer. If you have those type of processes, you can never get the right relationships in place in the CMDB. You know, we have standard catalog items like request a new server, and then it goes into a change management process. And for example, if I request a new server, I have to put in the application service for which I request this for into the request form, and then it's part of the standard change that the infrastructure team makes this relationship in the CMDB. So unless you do service mapping across your entire organization, which is in an enterprise very hard to do, that is simply not possible. So making sure that those deployment processes are well closed off with the right controls, that enables you to kind of, whenever you deploy a new server, you know what application it's for, and you know what purpose it serves. So it's all part of the process. How to work with CSDM 4.0 when you do not use DevOps? Can then the relationship between business application and directly used? Yes, George. So there's still a direct relationship between the business application and between the application service, and also all the backend tools like the application service wizard also still supports that. So it's not intended as a piece that you have to use in that case.
Yep. How easy is
Mira?
it to automate feeds into the CMDB? It's also a question. Yeah, how easy is it to automate? It kind of depends a little bit on the use case and on the integration that you need to build. ServiceNow has these service graph APIs that are out of the box configurations based on best practices, by which it makes it a lot easier to actually integrate with third-party sources. So in that case, it could be not so much effort. So I think some integrations can be done in 10 days, but it all depends also a little bit on how is the data quality in your source system. Do the fields actually map easily, or do we have some exotic things in there? Did we customize things in the source system? So it really, you need to assess it per use case actually, but with these common integrations where we have created service graph APIs for, it could also be pretty quickly configured in that way.
Myra, where infrastructure CI stands, CSDM is more service design and service portfolio management related. What about if our CMDB is not in good shape? With what do we need to start, services or hardware? So our approach is a little bit focused on both. So when we import a new class into the CMDB, we also define who is the data owner of this class and what services is he providing with that. Because that also allows us through the service offering to easily populate things like the support group or the data steward group on those components. So hardware-wise, I would usually start with indeed importing servers and then network components, because those are also usually the easiest to discover. But I would not approach them separately, where you're first going to import all the devices and then think about the services, so to say. How does the IRE work? So the IRE is the identification and reconciliation engine from ServiceNow. It's basically an engine that they built that has a number of rules that prevents things like duplication, or that prevents things like multiple sources updating the same CI and how that should work. So there's something called the CI class manager in ServiceNow, where you can see the rules that are actually being applied for each class. And there you can also change them. So if I say discovery should have a higher priority than my service graph connector or then a manual upload, then that's something that I can configure in the CI class manager. And Dirk-Jan Hazenberg, what is meant by CMDB coverage? So what we usually are very interested in if you use a tool like Discovery, you're not always sure on if you really have all the servers or all the databases that are deployed in your instance. Like you only know what the connectivity people give you for subnets. So we often talk to the data owners on what is the source of truth. To give you one example, for databases, we have Oracle Enterprise Managers for Oracle databases. If Oracle Enterprise Managers shows us we have 5,000 databases, but with Discovery we only find 3,000 databases, that means our coverage in the CMDB is not complete. So we have a gap. And then we can choose to either integrate with Oracle Enterprise Manager to complete that, or improve our discovery to have a higher completeness of the amount of items that we have in the CMDB. And I see the last question, how to set up the IRE rules. So again, I think what's similar to the question earlier, you can do that in the CI class manager, where you have both the reconciliation rules and the identification rules. So the identification rules is about how do we uniquely identify a CI. Can be based on serial number, can be based on IP address, can be based on a combination of things. And the reconciliation rules, that's something about we have multiple data sources. What priority do they have in updating certain attributes in the CMDB? Oh, I see one more question. Is it able to map two product models to a server, hardware, and software? Example, Windows 2019. No, as far as I'm aware, it's a one-to-one mapping. So the asset is mapped to a hardware model, for example, and the software it's not possible to map it to two different models, but there should be installed software on your server, and that should be mapped to a software model. So if we discover a Windows server, there's one part of just the model of the bare metal, for example, but there's also installed software on there, and that installed software will also have a reference to the software model. Okay, I think we reached the end of our webinar. I would like to hand it over to Kirtan. If you have any questions about self-healing CMDB or implementing CSDM in your organization, you can always reach out to me or Dylan.
Thanks, Rogier and Dylan, and thank you all for listening today. We will send the recording tomorrow via email, and please enjoy the rest of your day or evening. Thank you.